Now, everything we've been discussing here so far just gets the virtual machines into that environment. We haven't done anything else as far as building up the infrastructure of this public cloud space that we've paid for with our credit card. And so the environment that we're creating at this point may or may not even have access to anything at all. We haven't really created any virtual machines, so arguably they don't have any access to anything except for themselves. So let's actually, and I know I'm not going to go through the entirety of this network configuration. This entire topic is perhaps better addressed by some of the other cloud specific, like the VCP Cloud or the VCP NSX learning paths here at Pluralsight. But what I want to do, because the item exists here, the task exists here in this objective, and just also for completeness, is to show you from the vCloud Director perspective how you might go about configuring your networks in order to create that VPN connection between vCloud Air and also your on-site or on-premise network. That process we will go through probably half of the configuration here, because that's the half that exists there inside of vCloud Air. That happens over here under, I believe it's under Administration, where if we come here to our VDC and we take a look then at some of the edge gateways, we can take a look then also at how we would go about configuring the gateway at the edge of this public cloud network so that it can establish and maintain a VPN connection with our internal resources. Now, this process starts over here under the gateway, and if I right-click here, it's honestly, before we get into the services, we might want to take a look at the IP allocations that have been configured here on this gateway. Let's see here under Properties, where we can take a look at the different IP settings that have been defined for us as we created this virtual data center, this VDC. These settings are going to be found right here, and you can see that the IP address that is currently associated with our VDC is 107.189.112.217 right here. So this could be one IP address that we may be able to make use of, because that's one that's currently connected up to this external network that vCloud Director has provisioned for us. With this in mind, we can now come back here to our Edge Gateway and use that to go about configuring the Edge Gateway services, and specifically the VPN service here that will attach to other resources that may exist here in our local environment. Now, I can't show you the entirety of this configuration because it involves technologies that could potentially go beyond what we have here in our little lab environment. It can involve some additional networking gear that can support the creation and maintenance of these VPN tunnels. It can also involve the use of some VMware products that can maintain these tunnels for you. But for the most part, what you really need to know here is that it is possible to enable a VPN and then to create that VPN configuration either to another network in that vCloud Director organization, so somewhere there inside of vCloud Air, to another network in another organization, or in the case of connecting it to your local environment, a remote network here. If you were to create a name, for example, so this is to local data center. It's here where you could go about defining which of the networks here, first our default routed network, should connect up to which peer networks, or which networks here inside of my local environment. Inside of my local environment, those peer networks are going to be our 192.168.0 network. And if I put that there with a /24, that will show the 255.255.255 subnet mask. So this says I need to be able to access all of these peer networks out here in my local environment. In order to do that, I'm going to have to use the endpoint. Now, from the perspective of vCloud Director, the local endpoint is vCloud Director's local endpoint, and then vCloud Director's local ID. So that local ID is the one that we just read off just a second ago, which should be 107.189.112.217. So from the perspective of vCloud Director, its local ID is this IP address here. The peer ID will generally correspond with the internal address, the inside address on whatever device you're attempting to connect to create the VPN tunnel. So if you have some device that has an external address, one that points to the internet, and an internal address, probably one that exists on that 192.168.0 net, this peer ID would be whatever address that would be that faces the inside of your internal network. So 192.168.0. Who knows, 253, for example. Now that's for the inside address, but you also need to provide some way of routing through the internet to actually get access to your VPN termination device. That external address, the internet routable address, will be the peer IP address. So 12.13.14.15 or whatever your externally resolvable address will be. When you make that connection, you will provide it with an encryption protocol down here and a shared key. This shared key is a very large set of letters and numbers that you'll use to establish and maintain the VPN connection. And you can also adjust your MTU value down here. Once you've configured these, if you hit OK, this will provide you now that VPN connection, the first half of the VPN connection that you need to make in order to establish the tunnel between your local location and your vCloud director's location. That final process is something I can't show you because it's going to depend on what kind of infrastructure you have laid into place. So you may have some sort of perimeter router, you may have some sort of perimeter device that can provide for the other end of that VPN tunnel. The most important thing you should know here is that once you've defined the items over here for this side of the tunnel, you can then choose the peer settings view here to figure out exactly what you need to provide your own equipment inside your own data center to then complete the establishment of that VPN tunnel. So here is the local and peer endpoint and the local and peer ID. Here's the encryption protocol, and once again, the shared key you'll need to provide in that local equipment. That process, depending on what kind of equipment you have, is going to be very different. Different kinds of equipment just provide for those using very different types of interfaces, web interfaces and command line interfaces and whatnot. But this at least gives you a view for how things work at the vCloud Air level when it comes time to create that tunnel. Once you're done, down here under Close, you'll see that there's a little item here for status that shows a little not symbol. That not symbol will change to a green check mark, so you can verify then that you have a successful tunnel between your remote location and your local location.